in a series all year called One Story. And right now we are in a series called GPS, which is just a snapshot of the one story. And so in GPS, what does a GPS do? A GPS helps you to get somewhere from where you are to where you're trying to go. And so this GPS that we're looking at are people who had to make a decision. Do I follow this roadmap or do I go off track? And so just to get us caught up, if we go all the way back to Moses, we learned about Moses a couple weeks ago, now almost months ago. And we started off with Moses. He had this call that he was going to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. And so he leads them out. They get the 10 Commandments and they're following God with the pillar of cloud, the pillar of fire. And then they send spies into the land of Canaan to see the promised land, but they come back and they convince everyone not to go. And so then we get to a guy named Joshua. And Joshua ends up taking over after 40 years, and he leads the Israelites into the promised land. And then last week, we learned about someone named Ruth. And Ruth, she had a decision to make. Was she going to follow what God wanted or take the easy way out? And now, while this is all going on, we have the Israelites still. And the Israelites, they go through this book. So we have Joshua, then Judges. So there were people who would bring people out of being oppressed or something. They would kind of set them free. And these judges, what do judges do? They judge, but they rule and they help people find justice. And so Ruth chose to stay with Naomi instead of taking the easy way out. And then we get to a person named Samuel. So what's important about Samuel? Samuel was the last judge. And so he becomes a great prophet, a great leader of Israel. And Samuel would judge, and he would lead in the courts and creating justice among the people. So he would end up being the last judge because there's an issue. And so the issue is this clue right here. And so this is a crown, and a king or queen wear crowns. And so where we're going to pick up is the Israelites are trying to decide who to follow. They've been following God as their king for a while now, but now they start to see people around them, and the Israelites want a king like everyone else. So all these nations around Israel are having kings. They have kings, and the kings rule, and they see this, and they're like, I want that. We want a king like that. We want a king who looks great and handsome and can rule over everyone. And, sometimes we do this too. There are sometimes things that we get our eyes on and we're like, everyone else has this. I want this too. I have to have it. And it can take our eyes off of what God is leading us to do because of maybe it's a material thing, like something that we could have. And we go, I want that. I have to have that. And so you get rid of everything else, and that is all you want. And so maybe you do this too. Maybe you've even asked your parents for something because everyone else has it. But that's what the Israelites do. And it was not wrong for them to want a king. Even God told them that they were going to have a king back in Deuteronomy. But that king would be after God's heart. Now, this king that they want, though, they don't really want the king after God's heart. They want someone who's handsome and good looking and taller and a great leader. And they end up trying to decide what they're going to do. So the elders, they go to Samuel and say, Samuel, look, we want a king. We want a king. And we know that your sons aren't great, which was true. They were greedy and that they took bribes and things like that. But they go, we want a king. And so Samuel is actually pretty upset. So it says this in 1 Samuel 8:6. Samuel was displeased with their request and went to the Lord for guidance. So Samuel, he's upset, but what does he do? He goes to God for guidance. What do I do, God? What do I do? And you and I can do the same thing with situations that we face. When we get angry or upset or displeased, is that we can go to God and go, God, what do you want us to do? What do you want us to do? The Israelites, though, they were wanting this king for not the right reasons. Okay, they wanted this king because they wanted to be just like everyone else around them, and they were turning their back on God as their king. And so God told Samuel, he goes, hey, they are not rejecting you, they are rejecting me. This is what God's saying. And so he goes, I've done all these things for them, but they completely are ignoring all these things. So do as I ask, do what I say. And so warn them, though, what this king is going to be like. And so the only king the Israelites ever needed was God, but they were kind of done with that. They wanted a human king, and they wanted it now. And so Samuel goes to these elders, and he tells them, hey, this king, he's going to take your sons and your daughters, and he's going to work them hard. He's going to have the sons work the fields and do all this hard labor and farm and build things for him. And the women are going to have to cook and clean, and you'll have to give them more money and taxes and all these different things. And that does not sound good. But the Israelites have their mind so fixed on wanting a king that they say, well, we refuse to listen. He said, even so, we want a king, and we want to be like the nations around us. And so the Israelites wanted a king so badly that they didn't care about the unfairness this new king was going to bring. They wanted to be like everyone else, but God wanted them to be unlike everyone else. And God wants the same for us. God wants us to be like everyone else so we could be more like him. God wants us to be unlike everyone else so that we could be more like him. It says this in Romans 12, verse 2. It says, don't copy the behaviors and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. And so one of the words that sticks out to me is transform. And maybe you've heard of like transformers, or had things that can transform into other things. I like to think of it almost as like Play-Doh. Like maybe you've played with Play-Doh or clay. You can make it into anything, and you can transform it from like a star to a ball, or you can make maybe a dog out of it, and then you can make a house out of it. You can transform it into anything. And what this says is that we want God to transform us to be more like him. We want to be able to be molded by him. But when we have all these other things that we want or like feel like we have to have, we become more like those and not more like God. And life is more than flashy things or cool brands or things that we want to have. When we choose and follow God, he shows us the things that people are more important than the things. And we find true joy and happiness when we are transformed by God. And so we should only care about God being our king. But the Israelites, they have this split decision to make. What do we do? Do we have a king like everyone else, or do we follow God? And so the Israelites, they end up choosing a king over following God. So my question for you is, who is your king? Is God your king? Who do you follow? Or is God your king? Or is something else your king? And God wants us to be like everyone else and be more like him. And actually, it gives us more joy and happiness and fulfillment when we become more like him. And so sometimes it can be hard to be different, because it can be hard to hear God's voice sometimes and follow it. But life with God is an adventure, and we have freedom in following him. And so my question for you is, who is your God? And so when God is your king, who is your God? Who is your king? When God is your king, then you get to be transformed more like him and become more like him, which is amazing. So we hope you enjoyed this week's lesson. We will see next week what happens to the Israelites with this bad king. We'll see you then.